I'm Brooke, 32 years old, and I never thought my own sister would slap me across the face at her dinner table. The sound echoed through the dining room as Heather stood over me, her face contorted with rage, demanding I leave her house within 10 minutes. Years of complicated history exploded in that single moment, leaving everyone frozen in shock. The humiliation burned hotter than the sting on my cheek as I struggled to process what had just happened. Before I tell you how everything unraveled that night, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you love. Let us dive into what led to this breaking point. Growing up in our middle-class suburban home in Minneapolis, Minnesota, my childhood memories are filled with contrasting images of my relationship with my older sister Heather. With just a 3-year age gap between us, we shared a bedroom decorated with complementary colors, her side blue, mine purple, a visual representation of our connected yet distinct personality. In our early years, Heather and I were practically inseparable. I have vivid memories of building snow forts together during those brutal Minnesota winters, Heather meticulously planning the architectural structure while I focused on decorating the interior with icicles and pine cones. During summer breaks, we would ride our bikes to Lake Harriet, where Heather taught me how to skip stones across the water, patiently showing me the perfect wrist flick until I mastered. At night, we would whisper secrets across the darkness between our beds, giggling until our mother threatened to separate us if we did not go to sleep. Everything changed when Heather entered high school. Almost overnight, my admired big sister transformed into someone I barely recognized. The girl who once braided my hair and taught me card games now locked herself in our shared bathroom for hours, emerging only to criticize my childish interests or appearance. When I tried to join her conversations with friends, she would roll her eyes and make excuses to leave the room. "Brooke, could you just stop following me around? It is embarrassing," she told me one day when I was 12 and she was 15. Those words carved a wound that never fully healed. As Heather blossomed academically, the dynamic shifted further. She maintained a perfect 4.0 GPA, became student council president, and led the debate team to state championships. Meanwhile, I struggled with traditional academics, finding my strength instead in art classes and creative writing. Our parents, both successful professionals, dad an engineer and mom a hospital administrator, clearly related more to Heather's structured path. "Why cannot you be more like your sister?" became a refrain I heard too often, sometimes spoken directly, sometimes just implied in disappointed sighs when my report cards arrived. During family dinners, my parents would glow with pride as Heather discussed her latest academic achievement. "Heather has been accepted into the National Honor Society," my father would announce, raising his glass in a toast. When my turn came to share news about an art competition or creative project, their responses were polite but lacked the same enthusiasm. "That is nice, honey," my mother would say before quickly changing the subject. By the time I reached high school, I had stopped trying to compete with Heather's academic prowess. Instead, I carved my own path, focusing on photography and graphic design. While Heather joined pre-med clubs and volunteered at hospitals, I spent in the art studio and worked on the school newspaper. We orbited each other like distant planets, acknowledging but rarely connecting. After high school, Heather attended an Ivy League university on the East Coast, studying pre-med just as everyone expected. I chose a state arts college closer to home, majoring in graphic design. During holidays when she returned home, the divide between us only widened. She would talk about her prestigious internships and study abroad programs in Europe, while I shared stories about collaborative art projects and my part-time job at a local design studio. When Heather graduated with honors and was accepted to medical school, our parents threw an elaborate party. "We always knew you would accomplish great things," my father said in his emotional toast. I helped decorate for the celebration, designing personalized banners and photo collages that everyone complimented, yet I still felt invisible in the shadow of her achievement. 2 years after finishing medical school, Heather married Ryan, a successful accountant she met during her residency. Their wedding was a lavish affair at one of Minneapolis' most exclusive venues. As her maid of honor, a role I suspected she gave me more out of obligation than desire, I gave a speech highlighting our childhood memories, desperately trying to reconnect with the sister I once knew. Heather hugged me afterward, but the embrace felt hollow, a performance for the wedding guests rather than a genuine moment between sisters. Meanwhile, I had established myself as a freelance graphic designer, building a modest but growing client list. I lived in a small but charming apartment in the artistic Uptown district of Minneapolis, dating occasionally but prioritizing my career and friendships. My lifestyle was the polar opposite of Heather's traditional path. She and Ryan purchased a sprawling colonial house in an upscale suburb, and within 3 years had 2 perfectly behaved children, Madison and Ethan. Our already strained relationship faced another test 2 years ago when our father suffered a minor heart attack. Though he recovered fully, the health scare forced our family to confront mortality in a way we had never done before. In the hospital waiting room, as our father underwent tests, Heather criticized my response to the crisis. "You should have been here sooner," she whispered harshly, though I had left a client meeting immediately after receiving her call and driven across town during rush. "This is not about your schedule, Brooke. This is about family." Her words stung, especially since I had always felt excluded from her definition of family, her perfect husband, perfect children, and our parents, with me somehow existing on the periphery. After our father's recovery, Heather established a monthly family dinner tradition at her house. "It is important we stay connected," she insisted, though these gatherings often became showcases for her immaculate home, successful marriage, and perfectly behaved children. I attended dutifully, swallowing my discomfort for our parents' sake. As the months passed, tensions over family responsibilities increased. Heather constantly implied that her medical career and role as a mother made her too busy for additional family obligations. "Brooke has such a flexible schedule," she would say whenever our parents needed help, volunteering my time without consulting me. The resentment between us grew, a silent but potent force field that our parents either did not notice or chose to ignore. Heather's perfectionism and need for control dominated every family interaction. She scheduled our father's follow-up appointments without consulting him, reorganized our mother's kitchen during a casual visit, and sent me unsolicited articles about financial planning for freelancers. Her help always came wrapped in criticism, her concern tainted by condescension. Despite everything, I made continuous efforts to maintain peace. I brought thoughtful gifts to family gatherings, remembered her children's milestones with personalized cards, and bit my tongue when she made passive-aggressive comments about my lifestyle choices. I convinced myself that preserving family harmony was worth the personal cost, even as the emotional toll mounted with each interaction. What I never realized was how thin the veneer of Heather's perfect life had become, or how one dinner conversation would finally shatter the fragile peace we had maintained for years. The monthly family dinner at Heather's house had become an institution over the past 2 years, a ritual as predictable as it was tense. However, this particular October evening felt different from the moment I considered not attending. I had just landed the biggest client of my career, a nationwide sustainable clothing brand that wanted me to redesign their entire visual identity. After years of building my portfolio and reputation, this contract represented not just financial security but professional validation. The project would be featured in several design publications, potentially opening doors to opportunities I had only dreamed about. When I shared the news with our parents during our weekly phone call, their reaction surprised me. "Brooke, that is absolutely wonderful," my mother exclaimed, genuine excitement in her voice. "We always knew your creativity would take you places." "That is my girl," my father added with a warmth I rarely heard when discussing my career. "You will have to tell us all about it at dinner on Sunday." Their enthusiasm both touched and terrified me. For once, I had accomplished something they truly admired, but the thought of sharing my success at Heather's dinner table made my stomach knot. Throughout our adult lives, any personal victory of mine seemed to trigger Heather's competitive instincts. The last time I mentioned a feature in a local design magazine, she had immediately steered the conversation to a medical conference where she had presented research, effectively overshadowing my moment of pride. As Sunday approached, I debated how to present my news, or whether to mention it at all. Eventually, I decided that downplaying my achievement would only reinforce the pattern of diminishing myself to maintain Heather's ego. For once, I would allow myself to fully own my success. I pulled into the driveway of Heather's colonial-style house at exactly 5:30 p.m., precisely on time as she always insisted. The property looked like something from a home decor magazine, immaculate landscaping with seasonal mums flanking the front walkway, a tasteful autumn wreath adorning the glossy black front door. Everything about the exterior screamed perfection, just like Heather herself. Taking a deep breath, I gathered the bottle of wine I had brought and approached the house. Before I could ring the bell, the door swung open to reveal my sister, dressed in tailored dark jeans and a cream cashmere sweater, her blonde hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. "You are right on time," she said, her tone suggesting this was unusual rather than my consistent habit. Her smile appeared practiced rather than genuine as she accepted the wine. Interesting choice," she commented, examining the label of the boutique red blend I had carefully selected. "We are having fish, but I am sure someone will enjoy this later." I bit back a retort as I stepped into the foyer. Heather's house always made me feel simultaneously impressed and inadequate. The soaring ceilings, marble flooring, and carefully curated artwork created an atmosphere that belonged in Architectural Digest rather than a family home. No evidence of children existed in the main living areas, though I knew my niece and nephew lived here somewhere, presumably confined to perfectly organized playroom. "Mom and Dad just pulled up," Heather said, glancing out the window. "Ryan is in the kitchen finishing the appetizers. You can put your coat in the guest closet. Not the front one, the one down the hall." Even her directions carried an air of superiority, as though I might contaminate the family coats with my outsider garment. I complied silently, hanging my jacket in the designated closet before making my way to the kitchen to greet my brother-in-law. Ryan stood at the granite island, arranging smoked salmon on crackers with tweezers, a level of precision that screamed of Heather's influence. Unlike his wife, Ryan greeted me with genuine warmth, setting down his culinary tools to give me a quick hug. "Brooke, great to see you. How is the creative genius doing?" His friendly smile provided a momentary respite from the tension. "Actually, I have some exciting news about work," I began before Heather interrupted from the doorway. "Let us save the shop talk for dinner," she said briskly. "Mom and Dad are coming in now." Our parents entered with the customary flurry of hugs and cheek kisses. Mom handed Heather a homemade apple pie while Dad carried a small gift bag containing toys for the children. The contrast in how they greeted us was subtle but noticeable. With Heather, they were slightly deferential, as though visiting the home of an esteemed acquaintance rather than their daughter. With me, they were relaxed and familiar. "Brooke, you look wonderful," my mother said, squeezing my arm affectionately. "There is a glow about you today." "Probably just good lighting," Heather commented as she inspected our mother's pie. "Mom, you know I prefer it when you use the organic apples I recommended." As my parents exchanged looks of mild exasperation, Heather's children appeared, summoned like performers for a scheduled appearance. At 8 and 6, Madison and Ethan were unnervingly well-behaved, greeting adults with rehearsed politeness before sitting quietly on the living room sofa with their tablets. 15 minutes of screen time while the adults chat, Heather informed them with the precision of a laboratory timer. They nodded in unison, their expressions serious. While my parents settled in the living room with Ryan serving them drinks, I offered to help Heather in the kitchen. Despite her obvious reluctance to accept my assistance, social convention required her to agree. As I chopped vegetables for the salad according to her exacting specifications, I overheard a tense exchange between Heather and Ryan near the pantry. "Did you make the transfer?" she whispered urgently. "Not yet," Ryan replied, his voice tight. "We need to discuss this. We cannot keep moving money around like this." "Not now," Heather hissed. "Just make sure it is done before Monday. The Andersons will notice if we miss another payment." They fell silent as they noticed me nearby, Heather's face immediately reassuming its mask of perfection. But in that brief moment, I glimpsed something I had never seen before, fear in my invincible sister's eye. Throughout the pre-dinner preparations, I noticed other signs that all was not well in Heather's perfect world. Ryan drank 3 glasses of wine before we even sat down to eat, something I had never seen the usually moderate man do. Heather checked her phone obsessively when she thought no one was looking, her forehead creasing with worry each time. And despite the immaculate appearance of their home, I spotted past due notices partially hidden beneath a cookbook on the kitchen desk. More telling were the subtle tensions between Heather and Ryan, the way she flinched when he touched her waist in passing, the tight smile she gave when he made a joke about their recent budget discussions, the pointed comment about his increased workings. These were hairline fractures in the flawless facade they had maintained for years. As we finally gathered around the formal dining table, set with Heather's wedding china and polished silver, I found myself reevaluating everything I thought I knew about my sister's life. The perfection I had envied now seemed suspect, possibly even fraudulent. The realization brought me no satisfaction, only confusion and an unexpected pang of concern for the sister who had pushed me away for so long. Little did I know that these observations would soon fuel the most explosive confrontation of our lives, one that would permanently alter the landscape of our family. Heather's dining room looked like a spread from a holiday issue of Better Homes and Gardens. The table gleamed with polished silver and crystal glasses that caught the light from the elegant chandelier overhead. A centerpiece of autumn flowers and miniature pumpkins ran down the middle of the table, complementing the burnt orange linen napkins folded into perfect fans. Even the butter had been molded into maple leaf shapes, a detail so unnecessarily elaborate that it perfectly encapsulated my sister's approach to hosting. We took our assigned seats. Heather had actually printed small name cards, with our parents facing each other across the table, Ryan at one end and Heather at the head. I sat beside my mother, directly across from Ryan, which gave me a clear view of both him and Heather. The children had been served earlier and were now playing quietly upstairs, their absence making this feel more like a business dinner than a family gathering. "I have prepared sea bass with a lemon caper sauce," Heather announced as she began serving from an enormous platter. "The recipe is from Dr. Harriet Werner, you know, the cardiologist who wrote that Mediterranean diet cookbook I sent everyone last Christmas." "It looks wonderful, dear," our mother said, accepting her portion with appropriate appreciation. The first 10 minutes of dinner progressed with the usual superficial pleasantries. Ryan discussed a challenging client at his accounting firm. Mom shared updates about her garden club. Dad mentioned a new workshop tool he had purchased. I noticed Heather barely touched her food, instead refilling her wine glass twice while maintaining her end of the conversation with practiced ease. The turning point came when Mom mentioned their upcoming anniversary. 40 years in December, she said, reaching for Dad's hand across the table. "We have been thinking it might be time to consider downsizing. The house is too big for just the two of us now." "Downsizing," Heather set down her fork with a sharp clink against the china. "But you love that house." "We do," Dad agreed, "but the maintenance is becoming a lot. The stairs are not getting any easier on my knees, especially after that heart scare." "We have found a lovely single-story condo in that new development near Lake Calhoun," Mom added. "We would still have space for you all to visit, but without all the upkeep." "This seems very sudden," Heather said, her voice tight. "Have you really thought this through?" "We have been discussing it for months, actually," Dad replied. "We would need help sorting through everything we have accumulated over the years. There is a lifetime of memories in that house." "Of course I will help," Heather said immediately, then added with a sideways glance at me, "I cannot imagine Brooke would have time with her projects." The slight emphasis she placed on the last word made it clear what she thought of my career. Before I could respond, our father jumped in. "Actually, we were hoping both of you could help. It would give us time with our girls." His tone was deliberately light, but I could sense his awareness of the tension between us. "I would be happy to help," I said sincerely. "My schedule is flexible, and I can block off several weekends once you decide on timing." "Well, some of us have actual jobs with patients who depend on us," Heather said with a tight smile. "But I will certainly make time. After all, family comes first." The implication that my work was somehow less legitimate than hers hit a familiar nerve. On any other night, I might have let it pass, swallowing my defense along with the sea base. But something about the accumulated slights, combined with my recent professional validation, ignited a spark of rebellion. "Actually, I might have less availability than I thought," I said calmly. "I just landed the biggest client of my career. I will be redesigning the entire visual identity for Evergreen Apparel. They are a nationwide sustainable clothing brand," I added for context, knowing Heather would be unfamiliar with the company despite its significance in retail and design circles. "Brooke," my mother exclaimed, her face lighting up with genuine pride. "That is the news you mentioned on the phone. How wonderful." "This is a big deal in your industry?" my father asked, clearly trying to understand the significance. "It is huge, Dad. Their current annual marketing budget is over $5 million, and my design work will be featured in stores across the country. Plus, several design publications want to profile the rebranding process." As I shared more details about the project scope and what it meant for my career, I noticed two simultaneous reactions. My parents leaning forward with interest and engagement I rarely received when discussing my work, and Heather's face gradually hardening into a mask of displeasure. "That is really impressive, Brooke," Ryan said, raising his glass in a toast. "Congratulations." Thank you, I replied, allowing myself to fully inhabit the moment of professional pride. It validates all the years of building my portfolio and reputation. Sometimes the less conventional career paths take longer to pay off, but when they do, I let the sentence trail off, not wanting to sound boastful. Well, it is certainly nice to have a creative hobby that can pay the bills, Heather said dismissively. Though I cannot imagine the stress of such inconsistent income, at least in medicine, there is always job security. It is not a hobby, Heather, I corrected her, keeping my voice level. And while my income has fluctuated over the years, this contract alone exceeds what many people make annually. My mother, sensing the rising tension, attempted to change the subject. The sea bass is delicious, Heather. Would you share the recipe? But Heather was not finished. I just worry about your retirement planning, Brooke. One big client does not equal financial stability. Ryan and I started our IRA the moment we finished school. Something about her condescending tone, combined with the whispered financial conversation I had overheard earlier, broke through my usual restraint. That is interesting advice coming from someone who might be having money problems of their own, I said before I could stop myself. The table fell silent, Heather's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. What did you just say? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I knew I had crossed a line, but there was no turning back. I overheard you and Ryan talking about missed payments and transferring money. It sounds like your perfect life might not be as perfect as you pretend. Ryan set down his fork with a clatter, looking stricken. Our parents exchanged alarmed glances. How dare you, Heather whispered, her hands gripping the edge of the table. How dare you eavesdrop on private conversations in my home and then throw them in my face? I was not eavesdropping, I defended myself. You were whispering in the kitchen while I was right there chopping vegetables. But that is not the point. For years, you have talked down to me about my career choices and lifestyle, acting like your path is the only valid one. Maybe it is time for some honesty about where those supposedly superior choices have led you. The silence that followed felt eternal. I could hear the tick of the ornate wall clock, the soft hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, the pounding of my own heart. My parents sat frozen, witnesses to a collision they had long pretended was not inevitable. Then it happened. Heather stood up so abruptly that her chair nearly toppled backward. She circled the table to where I sat, her movements stiff and deliberate. Before anyone could react, her hand flew through the air and connected with my cheek in a slap that echoed through the dining room. The physical pain was nothing compared to the shock. In 32 years, through all our conflicts and tensions, we had never once become physical with each other. You have 10 minutes to leave my house, Heather said, her voice shaking with rage. Get out and do not come back. Our mother gasped. Our father half rose from his chair. Ryan called Heather's name in a horrified voice. But for a moment, my sister and I existed in a bubble of shared history and shattered pretenses, the culmination of decades of competition and resentment distilled into a single act of violence that neither of us had believed possible. As I raised my hand to my stinging cheek, I realized that something fundamental had just changed between us. Whether it could ever be repaired remained to be seen. The sting of Heather's slap seemed to suspend time in the dining room. My cheek burned not just from the physical impact but from the humiliation that flooded through me. Around the table, everyone remained frozen in various postures of shock, my father half risen from his chair, my mother's hand pressed against her mouth, Ryan staring at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Heather, my mother finally broke the silence, her voice trembling. What has gotten into you? Heather remained standing over me, her breathing ragged, her hands still partially raised as if she herself could not believe what she had done. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw regret flicker across her features, quickly replaced by the hard mask of righteousness I knew so well. I want her out of my house, Heather repeated, her voice lower but no less intense. Now. My father finally stood completely, his face ashen. That is enough, both of you, this has gone too far. I agree, I said quietly, pushing back my chair and standing. Despite the chaos of emotions swirling inside me, humiliation, anger, shock, I was determined not to break down in front of them. I will go. Brooke, no, my mother protested, reaching for my arm. Heather did not mean it. We should talk this through. But the look on Heather's face made it clear she had meant every word. She stepped back, arms crossed, waiting for me to comply with her eviction order. Ryan approached his wife cautiously. Heather, come on. This is Brooke, your sister. We can discuss whatever is going on without this kind of drama. Drama? Heather laughed bitterly. She comes into our home and throws our private financial matters in my face at the dinner table, and I'm the one creating drama. As they argued, I moved mechanically toward the front hall to retrieve my purse and jacket. My mind flooded with memories of childhood conflicts with Heather, her tearing the head off my favorite doll when I was 5 and she was 8, her accidentally spilling punch on my dress before my middle school dance, her telling my high school crush I had a contagious skin condition. But never, in all those years of rivalry, had she struck me. My mother followed me to the hall closet. "Honey, please do not leave like this. She did not mean it." "She did, Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady as I pulled on my jacket. "She has meant every hurtful thing she has ever done to me. You and Dad have just never wanted to see it." My father joined us, his face creased with distress. "Let us all calm down. No one needs to leave. We can sort this out like adults." "I'm being an adult by removing myself from a situation that has turned violent," I replied, surprising myself with my composure. "I love you both, but I cannot stay here right now." From the dining room, I could hear Ryan and Heather still arguing in hushed but intense voices. Through the partially open door, I caught a glimpse of Madison and Ethan peering down from the top of the staircase, their wide eyes taking in the unprecedented chaos in their usually controlled home. The sight of my niece and nephew witnessing this family breakdown added another layer of sadness to an already devastating evening. As I moved toward the front door, Heather emerged from the dining room, her face still flushed with anger but now mixed with something else, perhaps the dawning realization of what she had done in front of her children. Our eyes met across the foyer. In that moment, I saw beyond her anger to the insecurity and fear beneath. Whatever financial or personal problems she was experiencing, they had clearly pushed her to a breaking point. But understanding the source of her behavior did not excuse it. "I hope you find whatever it is you are looking for, Heather," I said quietly, "but it is not in tearing others down." Without waiting for her response, I walked out the door into the cool October evening. My hands shook so badly I dropped my car keys twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside the sanctuary of my car, I gripped the steering wheel and finally allowed the tears to come. I had not cried over Heather's treatment of me since high school, had long ago accepted our relationship for what it was. But something about this final line being crossed unleashed years of suppressed hurt. I sat in my car, parked in her perfect driveway, beside her perfect lawn, and sobbed until I could barely breathe. My phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming texts. I finally checked it to find messages from my parents and, surprisingly, from Ryan. "Mom, please come back inside. We need to talk as a family." "Dad, this is not right. Call me when you get home safely." "Ryan, I am so sorry about what happened. Heather is not herself lately. Please know this is not just about you." Notably absent was any message from Heather herself. I started the car and pulled away from the house where my sister had crafted her illusion of perfection, not irrevocably cracked. Driving through the quiet suburban streets, I felt oddly disconnected from my surroundings, as though the evening had happened to someone else. At a red light, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror, my mascara smudge, a faint red mark still visible on my cheek. The woman looking back at me seemed simultaneously stronger and more vulnerable than the person who had arrived at dinner just hours earlier. Unable to face going straight home to my empty apartment, I pulled into Lakeside Park, a place I often came to think when life became overwhelming. The October moon cast a silver path across the dark water as I walked to a bench overlooking the lake. The park was deserted at this hour, allowing me the privacy to process the seismic shift in my family dynamic. I thought about the patterns Heather and I had been locked in since childhood, her need to dominate and control, while alternating resistance and acquiescence. I thought about our parents' unwitting reinforcement of these dynamics, their well-meaning but harmful comparisons and differing expectations. Most of all, I thought about what it would mean to truly break free from these patterns rather than simply reacting to them. The realization struck me that while Heather had physically slapped me, I had also struck her where she was most vulnerable, her carefully constructed image of perfection. We had both transgressed, albeit in different ways. The recognition did not excuse her action but helped me see the evening with more clarity. As I sat watching the moonlight on the water, I made a decision. Whatever happened next, I would no longer participate in the toxic dynamic that had defined our relationship for decades. I could not control Heather's behavior, but I could control my own responses and boundaries. With that resolution forming a small core of calm within the emotional storm, I finally headed home to face the aftermath of a night that had changed everything. I arrived at my apartment just after 10, the familiar surroundings both comforting and suddenly strange after the emotional upheaval of the evening. My living space could not have been more different from Heather's showcase home. A one-bedroom apartment in an old converted warehouse featured exposed brick walls, tall windows, and an open floor plan that I had furnished with an eclectic mix of vintage finds and contemporary pieces. Art from local creators I had befriended over the years hung on the walls, and various design projects in progress were scattered across my work table near the window. Where Heather's house felt like a pristine museum, mine was undeniably lived in, books stacked beside the sofa, a half-finished mug of morning coffee still on the kitchen counter, vibrant throw pillows and blankets adding splashes of color to neutral furniture. It was imperfect and authentic, much like the life I had built for myself. I tossed my keys into the ceramic bowl by the door, a piece I had made during a pottery workshop last year, and headed straight for the bathroom. The woman in the mirror looked exhausted, her eyes red-rimmed from crying, a faint pink mark still visible on her left cheek. I washed my face, the cool water soothing against my skin, then changed into comfortable clothes before pouring myself a generous glass of wine. My phone had continued buzzing during the drive home. I now had 5 missed calls from my mother, 3 from my father, and several more text messages from both of them, all variations on the same themes: concern, confusion, and pleased to talk. I turned the ringer off and set the phone face down on the coffee table. I needed space before I could engage with their well-meaning, but often misguided attempts at family peacekeeping. Curling up on my sofa, I wrapped myself in the hand-knitted blanket my grandmother had made before she passed away. Grandma Rose had been my refuge during childhood, the one person who seemed to understand and value my creative nature without comparing me to Heather. "You girls are like the sun and moon," she once told me. "Different kinds of light, but both necessary." I wondered what she would make of tonight's implosion. As the city lights twinkled outside my windows, I found myself replaying memories of Heather throughout our lives, searching for the turning point when sisterly rivalry had curdled into something more toxic. I remembered us at ages 5 and 8, building a blanket fort in the living room during a thunderstorm. Heather had been protective then, holding my hand when the thunder became too loud, telling me stories to distract me from my fear. The memory was so vivid I could almost smell the fabric softener on the sheets we had draped over chairs. Then there was the summer I turned 12 and Heather 15, the year she returned from Camp Transform. Suddenly interested in boys and popularity, she had begun treating me as an embarrassment rather than a companion. I recalled sitting alone in our shared bedroom while she talked for hours on the phone with her new friends, occasionally covering the receiver to hiss at me to be quieter, though I was simply reading a book on my bed. By high school, the pattern was firmly established. Heather excelled in ways our parents valued and understood, while I floundered in traditional academics but flourished in creative pursuits they viewed as hobbies. Our paths diverged further with each passing year until we were essentially strangers who happened to share DNA and childhood memory. Yet there had been moments of connection, even in our adult years. Heather holding my hand at Grandma Rose's funeral, her genuine smile when I showed her the logo I had designed for her friend's pediatric practice, the time she defended me when a distant relative made a dismissive comment about artists at a family reunion. These flashes of the sister I had once adored made the current estrangement all the more painful. My phone lit up with a text that caught my attention, not from my parents but from Ryan. "Heather is not telling the whole story. Things have been difficult financially since she was passed over for department head. The perfect life you see is held together with credit cards and home equity loans. She is drowning and too proud to admit it." The message confirmed what I had suspected from the overheard conversation but added new context. Heather's professional setback would have been a significant blow to someone who defined herself by achievement and external validation. I felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness imagining my seemingly invincible sister facing failure. Another memory surfaced, Heather at 17, sobbing in our bathroom after receiving her first B+ on an AP chemistry test. "If I am not perfect, what am I?" she had asked when I found her, a question that revealed more about her inner landscape than perhaps she had intended. The phone lit up again with a call from my mother. This time, I answered. "Brooke, thank goodness," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Are you all right?" "Physically, yes," I replied, taking a sip of wine. "Emotionally, not really." "I have never seen Heather act like that before," my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper as though Heather might overhear, though I knew my parents had left my sister's house. "Your father and I are just shocked." "Are you really, Mom?" I asked, surprised by the edge in my own voice. "Because this tension between us has been building for decades while everyone pretended not to notice." A long pause followed. "We never wanted to take sides," she finally said. "Not taking sides is taking a side, Mom. It tells the person being hurt that their pain does not matter enough to intervene." Another silence stretched between us. Then, unexpectedly, my mother began to cry. "You are right," she said through tears. "We should have done more. We thought it would get better as you both grew up, that you would find your way back to each other." Her acknowledgement loosened something tight in my chest. "I have tried, Mom. For years, I have tried to maintain a relationship with someone who seems to resent my very existence." "She does not resent you," my mother protested weakly. "She just struggles with her own expectations, always has." "That may be true, but it does not give her the right to treat me the way she does. And it certainly does not excuse her hitting me tonight." "No," my mother agreed after a moment. "Nothing excuses that." We talked for another 20 minutes, covering ground that should have been traversed years ago. When we finally hung up, I felt emotionally drained, but also strangely lighter, as though the evening's explosion had cleared away some long-standing debris in our family landscape. I spent the rest of the night drafting and redrafting an email to my family. Not an apology, I had nothing to apologize for, but a clear articulation of my feelings and boundaries going forward. By dawn, I had composed something that felt both honest and measured. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Heather, last night crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. While I regret mentioning Heather's financial matters at dinner, physical violence is never an acceptable response to words. I need time and space to process what happened. I will not be attending family gatherings where I do not feel physically and emotionally safe. This includes the monthly dinners at Heather's house. I am open to rebuilding our relationship, but only with professional help and genuine acknowledgement of the harmful patterns we have all participated in. I love you all, but I must also respect myself enough to establish boundaries. Brooke." After sending the email, I made 2 more important calls, one to schedule an appointment with a therapist I had seen briefly after a difficult breakup 2 years ago, and another to my closest friend, Kate, who listened without judgment as I recounted the previous night's events. "Stay with me this weekend," Kate offered immediately. "We will drink wine, watch terrible movies, and not talk about family drama unless you want to." Her offer was tempting, but I declined. I need to face this on my own terms, but dinner tomorrow night would be great. As morning light filled my apartment, I received an unexpected text from Ryan. "Heather has not stopped crying since you left. She would never admit it, but she is terrified of losing you completely. Whatever happens next, please know that beneath all the competition and criticism, she does love you." The message complicated my feelings further. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as manipulation, but the image of my controlled, perfectionist sister breaking down felt authentic. Still, love that consistently manifested as criticism and control was not the kind of love I could continue to accept. I made myself breakfast and sat at my small dining table, gazing out at the city waking up below. For the first time since I could remember, I felt clear about my position in the family dynamic. I was not the lesser sister, the disappointment, or the afterthought. I was a successful woman who had built a life on my own terms, one that was now being recognized and valued in my professional field. Whatever happened next with Heather, I would approach it from this place of strength rather than the familiar position of defensiveness. The realization felt like taking a full breath after years of shallow breathing. A week passed with no direct contact from Heather. My parents called daily, their conversations walking a careful line between concern and respect for my boundaries. They did not push me to reconcile with my sister but made it clear they hoped for eventual healing. Ryan sent occasional texts with updates about the children, neutral messages that served as a tenuous thread between our fractured families. The following Saturday, I agreed to meet my parents at their home. We had not been together since the disastrous dinner, and despite my apprehension, I knew avoiding them would only complicate an already complex situation. Their house, my childhood home, had always been a place of mixed emotions for me. The split-level suburban house with its familiar blue shutters and wraparound porch held memories both warming and painful. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed my father had been gardening, the flower beds freshly mulched despite the approaching winter. Some habits persisted regardless of family drama. My mother opened the door before I could knock, enveloping me in a hug that felt more careful than usual, as though she feared I might break or pull away. "We are so glad you came," she said, leading me inside to where my father waited in the living room. The house smelled of cinnamon and coffee, my mother's standard welcome offering. The familiar scent triggered an unexpected wave of nostalgia for simpler times, before adult complications had calcified childhood rivalry. "You look well," my father said, embracing me briefly. His eyes searched my face with concern. "How are you really doing?" "I'm okay," I replied, settling onto the sofa. "Work has been a good distraction. The Evergreen project is moving forward, and I have meetings with their marketing team next week." We made cautious small talk for several minutes, discussing my father's garden plans and my mother's book club selection. The elephant in the room remained unaddressed until my mother finally set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. "We have been doing a lot of thinking this week," she began, "about the things you said on the phone after what happened." My father nodded, leaning forward. "We have not been fair to you, Brooke. For years, we have treated your accomplishments differently than Heather's, not because we value them less but because they were outside our frame of reference. We understood Heather's path," my mother continued. "Medical school, marriage, children, it followed a template we recognized. Your creative career was wonderful but, foreign to us, we did not know how to properly appreciate it." Their candor surprised me. I had expected the usual peacekeeping platitudes, not this level of self-reflection. "That means a lot to hear," I said carefully, "but the issue goes beyond professional recognition. It is about the dynamic between Heather and me, and how you have often enabled her behavior toward me." They exchanged glances, a married couple's silent communication. "You are right," my father acknowledged. "We have looked the other way too often when Heather has been dismissive or unkind to you. We told ourselves it was normal sibling rivalry, but it was more than that. We should have intervened," my mother added, her eyes welling with tears. "Especially when you were younger and needed our protection. I am so sorry, Brooke." Their apology, unexpected and seemingly genuine, loosened something tight in my chest. For years, I had wanted simply to be seen, my struggles acknowledged, my boundaries respected. This felt like a first step. "Thank you," I said simply. "I appreciate that." We talked for nearly an hour, unraveling years of family patterns with a frankness that had never before characterized our conversations. I explained how their different treatment of us had affected my self-esteem and relationship with Heather. They shared their own struggles as parents trying to navigate two very different daughters. None of it erased the past, but the honesty felt healing in itself. As we were discussing boundaries for future family gatherings, the doorbell rang. My mother froze, looking guilty. "Mom," I questioned, suddenly alert, "who is that?" "Heather asked if she could stop by," my mother admitted. "We did not tell her you would be here because we were not sure you would come if you knew." Anger flared briefly at this manipulation. "That was not your decision to make." "You are right," my father said quickly. "But please consider staying. You both need to talk eventually, and we are here as buffers." Before I could decide, I heard the front door open and my sister's voice in the entryway. "Mom, Dad, I brought those gardening catalogs you wanted to look at." Then Heather appeared in the living room doorway and stopped abruptly, her eyes widening at the sight of me on the sofa. She looked different than she had a week ago, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face devoid of makeup, dark circles shadowing her eyes. The polished perfection had been replaced by something raw and unmistakably vulnerable. "Brooke," she said, my name sounding like a question. "I did not know you would be here," I said, standing up. Mom and Dad neglected to mention that detail. An uncomfortable silence descended. My parents exchanged nervous glances before my father cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should give you two some privacy." "That is not necessary," I began, but my mother was already rising. "We will be in the kitchen if you need us," she said, practically pulling my father from the room. Alone with my sister for the first time since the slap, I felt a confusing mixture of anger, hurt, and an unexpected concern at her haggard appearance. Heather remained standing by the doorway, clutching a stack of gardening catalogs like a shield. "You look terrible," I said finally, the words escaping before I could censor them. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Always the honest one. "Someone in this family has to be." The barb landed visibly, her shoulders tensing. "I probably deserved that." "You definitely deserved that," I corrected her, but without the heat I might have expected to feel. Heather moved further into the room but maintained her distance, perching on the edge of an armchair rather than joining me on the sofa. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted after a moment. "Do what? Apologize? Have an honest conversation? Both are skills most people master before their 30s. "All of it," she said, setting the catalogs on the coffee table with shaking hands. "I have never been good at vulnerability." That is the understatement of the century. Heather looked down at her hands, now empty of their paper shield. "I hit you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I have never hit anyone in my life, and I hit my own sister. I do not even recognize myself anymore." The raw pain in her voice caught me off guard. I had expected defensiveness, perhaps a conditional apology, not this naked acknowledgement. "Why?" I asked simply. "What pushed you to that point?" She looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. It was not just that moment. It was everything collapsing at once. My life is falling apart, Brooke. The life I worked so hard to build, the one I was so proud of, it is all smoke and mirrors now. "Ryan mentioned some financial problems," I said cautiously. Heather laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. "Financial problems. That is one way to put it. I was passed over for department head 6 months ago, a position I was promised, one I had worked toward for years. The salary increase would have helped us catch up on the mortgage we can barely afford, the private school tuition, the credit card debt from maintaining the lifestyle everyone expects of successful Dr. Heather." Her words tumbled out faster now, as though a dam had broken. "Ryan has been suggesting we downsize for months, but I refused to admit failure. Then you announced your big career success at dinner, and everyone was so impressed, so genuinely happy for you. All I could think was that you, who never followed the rules, never did things the right way, were thriving, while I was drowning despite doing everything I was supposed to do." "So you hit me because I am successful?" I asked, incredulous. "No," she said quickly. "I hit you because you exposed my failures in front of everyone. Because in that moment, all the resentment and fear and shame just exploded. It was unforgivable, I know that." I studied my sister's face, seeing beyond the familiar features to the pain etched there. For the first time, I truly understood that Heather's perfect life had been as much a prison as a palace, the constant pressure to maintain appearances, to never show weakness or uncertainty. The realization did not excuse her behavior but contextualized it in a way that made her seem suddenly, startlingly human. "You know what the worst part is?" Heather continued when I remained silent. "Madison saw everything. My 8-year-old daughter watched me hit her aunt and then scream at her to leave. What kind of mother does that make me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks now, unchecked. I have spent her entire life trying to be perfect, to show her what a strong woman looks like. And in one moment, I taught her that violence is how we handle conflict. Her anguish was palpable, filling the space between us. Despite everything, I felt a surprising urge to comfort her. The big sister who had once held my hand during thunderstorms, who had taught me to ride a bike and braid my hair. "Heather," I said finally, "what you did was wrong, unequivocally wrong. But one terrible moment does not define you as a mother or a person." She looked up, surprise evident through her tears. "How can you say that after what I did to you?" "Because I have had a week to think about our entire relationship, not just that moment. And I realized something important. We are both products of patterns established long before we had any say in them. That does not excuse your behavior, but it helps explain it." I shifted on the sofa, turning more fully toward her. "You have been carrying impossible expectations your entire life, some placed on you by our parents, many self-imposed. The perfect student, doctor, wife, mother. Perfect house, perfect kids, perfect life. No one can sustain that indefinitely without cracking." Heather wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a childlike gesture that contrasted sharply with her usual poise. "I do not know how to be anything else," she whispered. "Maybe that is the problem," I suggested. "Maybe it is time to figure out who you are beyond the perfection." A long silence stretched between us, not comfortable but no longer hostile. Outside, I could hear birds in the maple tree, the distant sound of a neighbor's lawn mower. Life continuing despite our personal earthquake. "I am sorry, Brooke," Heather finally said, meeting my eyes directly. "Not just for hitting you, though that is unforgivable. I am sorry for years of competitiveness and criticism. For making you feel less than. For not celebrating your successes because I was too insecure about my own path." Her apology held none of the qualifiers I had come to expect from her. "No, but you provoked me," or if you had not said, just a clean, clear acknowledgement of harm done. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "Where do we go from here?" she asked, vulnerability evident in her voice. "Is there any way back from this?" I considered her question carefully. The easy answer would have been instant forgiveness, a tearful reconciliation, the Hollywood ending. But real relationships required more honesty than that. "I do not know," I admitted. "I am not ready to pretend everything is fine. What happened at dinner was the culmination of years of dysfunction, not an isolated incident. We cannot fix that in one conversation." Heather nodded, acceptance in her expression. "I understand. But," I continued, "I am willing to try building something new. Not the relationship we had, that was broken long before you slapped me, but something healthier, with real boundaries and mutual respect." "I would like that," she said quietly. "I miss my sister, the real one. Not the competitor I created in my mind." The admission touched something deep within me. I miss my sister too, I acknowledge. The one who taught me to skip stones and held my hand during thunderstorms. A tentative smile crossed her face, the first genuine one I had seen from her in years. "Do you remember that ridiculous blanket fort we built during that summer storm? Dad was so mad about the dining room chairs being used. But he let us keep it up for 3 days anyway," I finished, returning her smile with a small one of my own. It was a tiny moment of connection, fragile but real. Not forgiveness yet, but perhaps its precursor, recognition of the bond that existed beneath the years of conflict. As we continued talking, more carefully now, I realized I had reached a decision point. I could continue holding my justified anger close, using it as a shield against future hurt, or I could choose a harder but potentially more rewarding path, working toward healing while maintaining the boundaries I had finally established. In that moment, sitting across from my visibly humbled sister in our childhood home, I chose the latter. Not for her sake, but for my own. "I have a contact at Minnesota General who might be able to help with your department situation," I offered, the professional connection feeling like a safer starting point than deeper emotional territory. "She is on their board and mentioned they are restructuring the pediatric division." Heather hesitated, pride visibly warring with practicality. "I would appreciate that," she finally said, the simple acceptance of help perhaps the most significant shift of all. As our parents cautiously rejoined us, sensing the changed atmosphere, I recognized that we had taken only the first step on a long and uncertain path. There would be setbacks and old patterns to overcome, but for the first time in decades, I felt a glimmer of hope that my sister and I might eventually find our way back to each other, not as the children we once were, but as the women we were still becoming. 3 months after what my family now delicately referred to as the incident, I sat in my newly expanded studio space, putting the finishing touches on the evergreen apparel campaign that had launched my career to new heights. The success of the project had exceeded even my optimistic projections, leading to a feature in Design Quarterly and a flood of inquiries from potential clients. I had hired my first assistant and was considering taking on a junior designer to handle the increased workload. Professional success felt satisfying, but the personal growth of the past months had been equally significant. Weekly sessions with Dr. Larson, my therapist, had helped me untangle the complex web of family dynamics that had shaped my self-perception for decades. I had learned to recognize patterns of people-pleasing and approval-seeking that stemmed from years of being the lesser sister, and was developing healthier ways to relate to both my family and myself. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Do not forget, dinner at 5, new house, Dad made lasagna." I smiled at the message. My parents had completed their downsizing, moving into a single-story condo that suited their needs perfectly. The process of sorting through decades of accumulated possessions had been cathartic for all of us, providing natural opportunities for conversations about shared memories and differing perspectives on our family history. More importantly, my parents had made real efforts to change long-established patterns. They called regularly to ask about my work, showing genuine interest in my creative process. They had attended the gallery opening where some of my photography was featured, proudly introducing themselves to other attendees as Brooke's parents. Small gestures, perhaps, but meaningful in their consistency. My relationship with Heather remained a work in progress. After our confrontation at our parents' house, we had given each other space while both pursuing individual therapy. Our initial contact had been primarily through text messages, brief, cautious exchanges about practical matters like our parents' move. Gradually, these expanded to include occasional coffee meetings on neutral ground, conversations that remained careful but increasingly honest. I learned that Heather had made significant changes in her life. With Ryan's support, she had downsized their home, moving to a more modest house in a different neighborhood. Her children had transferred from expensive private schools to well-regarded public ones. Most surprisingly, she had reduced her hours at the hospital to 4 days a week, using the 5th day to provide pro bono medical care at a community clinic serving low-income families. "It is the most rewarding work I have ever done," she had told me during one of our coffee meetings, her face animated in a way I had not seen in years. "These families are so grateful for basic care that I used to take for granted. It has completely shifted my perspective on what success really means." The professional connection I had offered had indeed led to discussions about a position at Minnesota General, though Heather ultimately decided to remain at her current hospital with a modified schedule. "I am learning to define success on my own terms," she explained. "Not by title or salary, but by impact and personal fulfillment." As I drove to my parents' new condo for our monthly family dinner, now hosted by them rather than Heather, I reflected on how much had changed. The rigid family hierarchy had given way to something more fluid and authentic. Our boundaries remained firmly in place, but they now served as healthy guidelines rather than defensive barriers. I arrived at the condo to find my parents putting the finishing touches on dinner. Their new home was smaller but warmer somehow, filled with only the possessions they truly valued rather than decades of accumulated things. My father proudly showed me the small balcony garden he had created, while my mother arranged a simple but elegant table setting. When the doorbell rang, I felt the familiar flutter of tension that still accompanied Heather's arrival at family gatherings. Some patterns were deeply ingrained and would take time to fully release. Heather entered with Ryan and the children, all of them more casually dressed than I would have imagined possible a few months ago. Madison ran to hug our parents while Ethan shyly showed me a drawing he had made at school. Heather met my eyes across the room, offering a small but genuine smile that I returned. Dinner unfolded with a natural rhythm that had previously been missing from our family gatherings. My father served his slightly imperfect lasagna with exaggerated ceremony, making jokes about his culinary skills that would never have been allowed in the era of Heather's precisely plated gourmet meals. The children giggled and occasionally interrupted, behavior that the old Heather would have corrected immediately but that now went largely unremarked. Conversation flowed more easily, touching on work, community events, and plans for the upcoming holidays. When I mentioned a challenging aspect of the Evergreen project, everyone listened attentively, offering encouragement rather than solutions or comparisons. When Heather shared a story about a difficult patient, I found myself genuinely interested rather than searching for subtext or competition. After dinner, while Ryan helped our father set up his new sound system and the children explored the condo's small community playground visible from the balcony, Heather and I found ourselves alone in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. "Remember when we used to fight over who had to do the dishes?" Heather asked, handing me a plate to rinse. "You always insisted I did not get them clean enough," I recalled, but without the bitterness that would have colored such a memory before. "I was an insufferable perfectionist," she acknowledged with a rueful smile. I teased gently. She laughed, a sound I had rarely heard in our adult years. But I'm working on it. My therapist says awareness is the first step." We worked in companionable silence for a moment before Heather spoke again, her voice softer. "I never properly apologized to you, Brooke." "Not really." I started to object, but she shook her head. "No, I need to say this. What I did that night was inexcusable. The slap itself was terrible enough, but it was just the physical manifestation of years of subtle cruelty and competition. I am truly, deeply sorry for all of it." The simple sincerity of her words touched me more deeply than any elaborate apology could have. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot to hear." "I cannot change the past," she continued, but I want you to know I am committed to being different moving forward. To being the sister you deserve rather than the one you got stuck with. We both got stuck with patterns that were not of our making, I said, surprising myself with the insight. The difference now is that we are choosing to create new ones. Heather nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Do you think we will ever get back to where we were as kids, before everything got so complicated? I considered her question seriously. No, I said finally, and I do not think we should. Those children do not exist anymore. But I think we can build something new that honors who we are now, something authentic rather than perfect. I would like that, she said simply. We rejoined the family in the living room, where Madison was showing everyone a dance routine she had learned at her new school. I watched my niece twirl across the carpet, her face alight with childish joy, and caught Heather's expression as she observed her daughter. There was pride there, yes, but also something new, a relaxed enjoyment unmarred by mental calculations about performance or appearances. As the evening drew to a close, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 3 months. The family dinner that had ended with a slap and an eviction had been painful, even traumatic, but it had also been necessary. Like a bone that must be broken to heal properly after years of growing wrong, our family had needed that fracture to find a healthier alignment. I had learned that perfect families do not exist, only real ones with flaws, challenges, and the capacity for growth. I had discovered that true success cannot be measured by others' standards or expectations, only by personal fulfillment and integrity. Most importantly, I had found that forgiveness does not require forgetting or excusing harm, but rather choosing freedom from the weight of resentment while maintaining clear boundaries. On the drive home, I called my friend Kate, who had supported me throughout the family upheaval. How was it? She asked cautiously, knowing the complicated emotions these gatherings still triggered. It was good, I replied, surprised to find I meant it. Not perfect, but real, and right now that feels like enough. As I pulled into my apartment building's parking lot, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for years. The journey with my family was far from complete. There would be setbacks, old patterns reasserting themselves, new challenges to navigate. But for perhaps the first time in my adult life, I was approaching these relationships from a place of strength rather than insecurity, of choice rather than obligation. The slap that had seemed to end everything had, paradoxically, created space for a new beginning. Not the Hollywood version with tear-filled reconciliations and instant healing, but something messier, slower, and ultimately more meaningful, a genuine connection built on honesty rather than appearances, on acceptance rather than competition. And in that authenticity, I had finally found the answer to the question that had haunted both Heather and me throughout our lives. Perfection was never the goal worth pursuing. The real treasure was in the courage to be imperfectly ourselves, to love imperfectly but sincerely, and to find beauty in the cracks rather than hiding them behind a flawless facade. Have you ever experienced a painful family confrontation that ultimately led to healing? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more content about family dynamics and personal growth. Remember that sometimes the most difficult moments in our relationships can become the catalyst for positive change. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you courage in navigating your own family journey.